So now it's day 10. Most of our docking missions are typically about 10-day missions. The last two missions of the shuttle will be about 10-day missions. Close the payload bay doors, perform the deorbit burn. We're falling back into the Earth. I'm actually holding the camcorder there, taking a picture of Terry. This is the long-range camera at Florida, and it's about sunset, so it's actually the sun angle that's making a lot of that look very white at the bottom. Your glide slope is 19 degrees, and it's a 200,000-pound glider. And you'll hold 19 degrees until you're real close to the ground so that you don't fall out of the sky. And you see the heads-up display. This is the pilot's view. We usually put the camera on the pilot's side. So it's going through 11,000 feet right now. You'll want to actually put it down in the numbers at 195 knots. We get around 5,000 feet, we start pulling the nose up, and get around 300 feet, and you're going to come in at nose up. You hit the ground effect. The gear come down about 500 feet, and now you're just going to hold airspeed. And it should very gently settle in onto the runway. We really learned a lot from the X-15 program. We flew back in the 1960s on lifting body dynamics. So it was a really gentle landing. The drag chute goes out, helps slows us down, and then the nose comes in at about 140 knots when it sets down on the runway. Now we don't necessarily need the drag chute for the length of runway in Florida, but it does save wear and tear on the gear and the brakes. And if we had to do an abort flight into Africa or Hickam or any number of runways around the world, we might need that drag chute, so we always use it. We landed at sunset. You kind of see the angle out there. It was a perfect mission. My last mission, 5 missions, exchanged crew members, did the research, had no major problems, and so it was really a perfect ending to a flight career. And you can see all but Dave there. He's off getting his physicals, and he's having a hard time walking. He's been up there for 90 days. And of course, what every pilot likes to do is really, especially a shuttle, because you don't have engines, you're just rolling out, and you do have nose wheel steering. The important thing is that you end up right in the middle of the black line. And so Terry and the shuttle, none of the pieces like the European, Japanese, Russian pieces, they were not put together on the ground before they were put together in orbit. It's a real testimony to engineering, to the processes that exist right now, that everything fit. And the crews have put all of the electrical and cooling lines together. That's why we do a lot of EVAs. You may have been listening to those spacewalks who've been doing this last week. Great views of the Earth. And the sayings were put up there by our engineers and scientists. So we started out very early with a few pieces, and here's a hurricane in the Atlantic. See those two Russian pieces right there and one US piece. Sun glint over the Atlantic. We've got an astronaut that's on the Canadian robotic arm and on one of the solar array trusses. Sunrise from Earth orbit. You're probably about 150, 200 miles up at this point. You can see the limb of the Earth and the atmosphere. This is a resupply module that was actually launched on the shuttle but built by Italy. And we sometimes use very mundane terms for our vehicles like Dash 1 or Dash 2 or something. And so the Italians were very creative. They named theirs Leonardo, Donatello, and Raffaello. So you can hear Capcom saying to one of the crew members, go unload Leonardo or something like that. You can also see both the Canadian robotic arms there. They actually do have Canada written on both of them. This is looking out the back window of the shuttle, the tail, and of course the Earth back there. The southern lights over Antarctica. The Russian portion of the station. The U.S. lab Destiny as it's being docked in, this was in 2001, 9 years ago. The airlock, which was being assembled. Another great saying, every great advance in science is issued from a new audacity of the imagination. It's hanging on the robotic arm there. Atlantis docked to the Unity part of the station as the U.S. portion. Sand dunes over West Africa, the largest in the world. You can see them from space with your naked eye. The shuttle after it's undocked from the station over the Middle East. And I think this is over Northern Africa. Picture of an astronaut taking a picture of an astronaut. It's getting bigger now. It's over South America. This is the launch site in Russia, Kazakhstan. And the crew member in the center there is actually Bill Shepard, Navy SEAL. It's the first American up to the International Space Station. And it's getting bigger now. It's got solar arrays and radiators and communication antenna over the Himalayas, over the Mediterranean. And as Gandhi said, we must become the change we want to see. So we have this really big station up there. If you remember the drawing that went back into the 90s. In fact, we brought the Russians on in 1993. So, and it finally got solidified in 94. And this is what it looks like today. And I don't know if you knew you could actually go outside and see it. If you go to the NASA website, spaceflight.nasa.gov, wherever you live, just look up your state, your nearest city. It'll tell you when it's coming over. My 83-year-old mother looks it up and calls all the neighbors, and it's much bigger than Sputnik. Sputnik was 23 inches in diameter, and this is a football field long. That's 100 yards. And so it's pretty bright. If it's coming right over, you can see it for about 5 minutes, just one kind of bright, big bright light, about as bright as Venus right now. And of course, we've had people up there, more than 300 altogether with the shuttle, 16 nations, all flying and doing research together. And actually, not long ago, we had 4 women up on the station, which was quite remarkable. And as Amelia Earhart said, adventure is worthwhile in itself. Well, one of the questions I was asked was, what brought me to the museum? Well, I flew this flight in '98, and then I was in the senior executive service for 7 years, and we set up, we're part of the space station redesign. I did that at NASA headquarters, and then we built a brand new mission control center with, as you go through our space exhibit, you'll see the old mission control center with the old consoles. It's where I started out. Now we've got fancy computer-based, Windows-based, color CRT computers in mission control. And then I helped set up a research division at the Johnson Space Center. I was on the board of the museum, and I got a call one day saying the president was retiring, and would I consider applying to be the new president? And I thought, well, this might be kind of fun. I'll practice for my next career. So I practiced and then got a call asking me if I'd accept the job. And the reason I did is that at the time, we were building the International Space Station. We'd started. But I remembered back in 1998 being sent to Washington, D.C. by my boss. I was the assistant director at the Johnson Space Center. We were having some real problems finding enough qualified graduate students to do our research at the universities. And I say qualified, I mean U.S. citizens or green cards. We were finding that we were having, our contractors were having a hard time finding U.S. citizen engineers because you're working for the U.S. government. So the military has the same problem. And we were sort of wondering what was going on. And so I went to visit with the National Science Foundation and found out that the number of engineers we were graduating in this country had been declining since the 1980s. And that if we were really going to continue going into space or any other great engineering venture, we had to start working on the pipeline. And the museum has as its mission outreach and education. So it reaches about 120,000 kids a year. And this was an opportunity to really be on the front line and try to make a difference, inspire these kids, particularly in aerospace careers. So of course these are pictures of the museum and the Great Gallery, our Red Barn and the Personal Courage Wing. This is in the World War I segment in the trench exhibit. I don't know if you knew we had a theater group, so don't be surprised, particularly on a weekend. I actually was taking a donor around this area, and we do this with high school kids. They study the history of an actual person, then they become that person. So here's a young 17-year-old doughboy wandering through the trench with a bloody bandage on his head. And he comes up to my donor and says, "Have you seen my unit? Have you seen my unit?" And wanders off, and it really shocked this guy. But they do this for a reason, to learn that history, and they take on that part. And we have, of course, senior people do it as well. For those of you who've been in the World War II floor, you've seen like our Corsair, which was pulled out of Lake Washington and restored. Our B-17 is currently down the field, but we celebrated the 75th anniversary this year at a big gala, June, and actually towed it out of where it's currently covered. Across the street in our air park, we have, of course, the Concorde, and then we have the 707 Air Force One, and you can go into the Concorde and Air Force One, and the 727 and 37 and 47 out there. Up at Everett, we have 2 restoration hangars. This is just one of about 27 different projects. This is the FM2 Wildcat that we're working on. And then across the street, we also have our Library and Archives building, including our Dahlberg Center for Military Aviation History. Among our collections, we have the original corporate Wright papers and photos. We have about 2 million original aviation photos, and some of them are the Wright pictures. Personal stories, and we continue to collect personal stories and personal artifacts. We just renovated our tower exhibit, so I encourage you to go up there and see all the exhibits, and then go out to the tower. This is on the runway, and if you're lucky, the 787 will be doing landing and takeoff tests. They've been doing them all week, and it's really a sight to behold. In our space exhibit, you can see our Apollo Command Module. And then on the upper left is the inside of our Destiny Lab on the station, and on the lower right is the actual one in orbit with crew. So you can see we've got a pretty high fidelity lab. You can't read this, but this is the point about education. There's a big peak. This is graduating engineers. There's a kind of a peak for undergraduates on the left and master's and PhD students on the right. And altogether in this nation, we graduate about 70,000 engineers a year. The demand's probably twice that much. China's graduating 10 times that many, and India 4 times that many. And we have really got to fix that. And it's not just a matter of encouraging kids when they're a senior to go into engineering, because they're not going to have the math and science. It starts out in middle school, and that's where we're impacting them the most, is to make sure they understand and love math and science, that we don't build airplanes without it, that we don't solve the world's problems without scientists and engineers, and particularly engineers, to make it. So we believe in hands-on. We have 22 different programs, including a Challenger Learning Center. We run camps in the summer, K through 12. We work with some undergraduates as well. Believe in interactive programs. You can build airplanes in the summer, or you can build rockets. You can sit in a cockpit of an SR-71. You see kids there, but some days I see just adults lined up there, so you have to elbow your way in. It's a great photo opportunity. This is for our really young kids. It's called Early Learning, Pre-K through Elementary, Flight Zone. Our Challenger Learning Center, which is under the lobby as you come in. You can actually see part of it once you go down into the Great Gallery. We have an Aviation Learning Center where we teach the principles of aviation. And then we put them in a Cirrus. This is also under the lobby. It flew in there, and then we built the room around it. You can actually power up the avionics. Then they file a flight plan, and we have small kid-sized simulators, and they fly flights with a control tower telling them what to do. In the summer, we bring juniors from around the state together, and they design a mission to Mars, and they also tour companies and the university. It's called the Washington Aerospace Scholars, and that's, we hope, we're making a dent in the next generation. And our future vision, as you look at where that air park is to do 3 things. First, we have applied for the shuttle. We're one of 21 institutions that has, and we've already broken ground. Actually, the shovels broke ground in the new gallery about 3 weeks ago, and in September we're going to start building the space gallery. And even if we don't get the shuttle, we're going to build a first-class space gallery. That was always in our plans. Eventually also to cover all of our airplanes. And then that AAHS, that's the Aviation High School. 6 years old, just a remarkable school, kids from public high school. And kids have to apply, have to want to be part of it. 4 years, 400 students. They've taken kids that were just average performers, and because they use aerospace as the hook, and they've raised the bar. They have a 98% graduation rate in a city that has a 60% graduation rate. And they're graduating in the top 3 of high schools around the country, in fact, the state. doing wonderful things. No sports team, but they can join sports in other schools, and they have FIRST robotic teams.